The velvet dark of the early morning holds a peculiar, static tension, the kind that exists just before the realization of a colossal error. Imagine a wanderer in a vast, uncharted wilderness. This traveler possesses a map, hand-drawn and frayed at the edges, detailing every mountain peak, every river bend, and every hidden oasis they believe they must encounter to reach their promised destination. They clutch this parchment so tightly that their knuckles have whitened, their focus entirely locked onto the ink and paper representation of the world. They do not look at the horizon. They do not observe the shifting play of light upon the ancient oaks. They do not hear the symphony of the wind through the canyon. They are so busy ensuring their boots follow the precise, treacherous trail marked on the map that they fail to notice the paved highway just a few hundred yards to the east, nor the lush, overflowing river that flows just behind the ridge they are currently struggling to climb. This is the silent crisis of the modern seeker. It is the moment when a spiritual practice designed to liberate the soul metastasizes into a sophisticated cage of anxiety. The seeker begins with hope, like a flame ignited in a drafty room. They recite the affirmations, they hold the vision, they practice the art of trusting. Yet, the air in the room grows heavy. A subtle, cold dread creeps into the quiet spaces of the heart. Did I phrase it correctly? Was my intent pure enough? Did I waver for a fraction of a second, thereby polluting the entire field of possibility? The irony is as sharp as a razor's edge. The very tools intended to dissolve the boundaries of the self have become the walls of a prison. The seeker is no longer navigating life. They are managing a performance for an invisible, demanding audience. The practice is no longer a conversation with the infinite. It is an audit of one's own internal state. In this state of hypervigilance, peace is not the destination. It is a variable to be tracked, a metric to be improved, and ultimately, an impossible standard that renders every day a test of worthiness. The map has become the territory, and the journey has been sacrificed at the altar of the route. To understand why this spiritual decay occurs, one must peer into the mechanics of the human psyche, specifically the interplay between the reasoning mind and the instinctual need for security. The reasoning mind is a magnificent instrument, yet it is fundamentally limited by its reliance on the past. It constructs the future by rearranging the architecture of yesterday. When a person adopts a spiritual practice, the reasoning mind immediately attempts to colonize it. It asks, "How can I make this work?" and translates work into predictable, controllable outcomes. Why does the mind do this? The answer lies in the terror of the unknown. To surrender is to acknowledge that the outcome is not under one's direct, causal supervision. The human ego finds this prospect intolerable, thus it performs a sleight of hand. It adopts the language of faith but retains the mechanics of control. This is the recursive trap. We ask, why we feel anxiety, and the mind answers, because the desired result has not appeared. But if we push deeper and ask, why that anxiety persists, despite our affirmations, we uncover the hidden premise. I believe that the good is a finite, singular object that I must trap through the repetition of words. This is where the distinction between divine direction and personal will fractures. Personal will demands a specific coordinate. Divine direction acknowledges the essence of the need. The reasoning mind is obsessed with the shape of the answer, the specific job title, the exact bank balance, the particular person, the precise timeline. It treats reality as a locked room to which it must manufacture the key. But if one were to examine the how of true manifestation, one would find that it is not a process of building, but of allowing. The fundamental error is the belief that our words are a vending machine for the universe. In this distorted theology, the affirmation is the coin. The intense focus is the button, and the desired outcome is the snack. When the machine does not dispense the prize, the seeker does not question the machine. They question their own efficacy. They become a self-policing agent, scrutinizing their every thought for contamination. They begin to fear their own shadow, believing that a momentary lapse into humanity, a flicker of fear, a wave of sadness, is a catastrophic breach of the law of attraction. This is not spirituality. It is superstition masquerading as enlightenment. It is the attempt to use the language of the eternal to serve the panic of the temporal. In the annals of a forgotten port city, there lived a shipwright named Elias. He was known for building vessels that were not merely fast, but seemingly enchanted. They sailed through gales that claimed lesser ships, and they always arrived at their destination with an ease that defied the currents. One day, a young apprentice, eager to learn the secret of Elias's success, asked, "Master, tell me the secret. Do you chant a spell as you lay the keel? Do you use a specific wood that draws good fortune?" Elias smiled, though his eyes held the weight of many tides. He invited the boy to the shipyard. "I have no spell," Elias said, pointing to a pile of blueprints. "But for 30 years, I have possessed a compass given to me by an old navigator. It is not like yours. Your compass points north. Mine points toward the harbor of arrival." The apprentice watched, fascinated, as Elias began to build. He noticed that Elias did not follow the standard measurements of the guild. He carved the hull based on the feeling of the wood under his hand. When the wind changed, he did not fight it. He adjusted the sail to catch the new angle. He did not insist that the ship take the direct, straight-line route across the shoals. He let the ship find its own way through the deeper channels. Years later, the apprentice, now a master himself, tried to replicate the success. He acquired a compass, just like the one he remembered. He spent his days obsessing over the needle, watching it tremble, demanding that it show him the perfect path. He forced his workmen to follow the exact, rigid, straight-line route he had calculated. When a storm hit, he did not steer into it. He raged against the waves, shouting that they were not following his plan. His ship foundered on the rocks, shattered by the very waves it sought to ignore. The apprentice had understood the form of Elias's method, the compass, but he had missed the essence. Elias had not been following a map. He had been following the water. He understood that the destination was not a point on a chart, but a relationship with the sea itself. The shipwright did not control the ocean. He became a partner to its design. The apprentice had mistaken the tool for the power, and in his desperate need for certainty, he had lost the ability to navigate the reality that was actually unfolding before him. The transition from the tyranny of the map to the freedom of the voyage begins with a singular, quiet admission. I have been trying to command the form rather than accept the essence. If the reader finds their pulse quickening as they read these words, it is likely because they recognize the map they have been clutching, the career path they are forcing, the relationship they are desperately sculpting, the version of their future they are trying to cement. To integrate this truth, one must perform a brief internal audit. Today, pause in the midst of your pursuit. When the urge to check on the progress arises, when you feel that familiar, sharp anxiety, demanding to know why the universe hasn't delivered the requested result, stop. Breathe into the space where the demand usually sits. Ask yourself, am I asking for the good, or am I demanding the root? If you are feeling the pressure of this realization, you are not alone. There is a deep, transformative relief in admitting that you do not need to be the sole architect of your life. This is the moment to pause, reflect, and perhaps, if this resonance speaks to your own journey, like this content not as a social gesture, but as a digital marker of your intent to stop forcing and start flowing. You are currently standing at the threshold of a new architecture. You have been treating your spiritual practice like a heavy coat of armor, hoping it would make you invulnerable to the uncertainty of life. But what if you were to take it off? What if the right path was not the one you had so carefully drawn in ink, but the one that reveals itself only when you are brave enough to put the map away? In the next chapter, the conversation moves from the theoretical to the clinical. We shall descend into the vending machine mindset that has characterized modern manifestation, dissecting why the most popular rituals often serve to heighten our desperation rather than deepen our faith. You are beginning to realize that the most powerful thing you can do is not to change your words, but to change the spirit from which they arise. The path ahead is quiet, but it is moving, and your good is already waiting, perhaps just not where your map said it would be. Step into the digital agora of our present age. It is a cacophony of neon-lit promises and high-frequency vibrations. Scroll through the endless feed, and you will encounter the modern manifestation market. A shimmering bazaar where the currency is intent and the goods are results. Here, the air is thick with the scent of sage and the frantic energy of people trying to bargain with the infinite. There are boards plastered with images of dream homes and luxury vehicles. There are journals filled with meticulously scripted affirmations, repeated like mantras to appease a celestial debt collector. There are videos promising that if you simply align your frequency, if you feel the feeling, if you hold the thought, if you refuse to doubt for a single millisecond, the universe will have no choice but to surrender your desire. It is a curious, sensory-rich spectacle. Observe the seeker, slumped in the glow of a laptop, repeating a phrase for the 40th time. The room is silent, yet the seeker's mind is a thunderstorm. They have been taught that their internal state is a magnet, and they are terrified that if they allow themselves to be human, to feel tired, to feel lonely, to feel uncertain, they will lose their magnetism. They are performing a ritual of control, dressed in the garments of spirituality. They have turned the divine mystery of life into a transactional equation. The paradox is profound. In a time when we have more access to spiritual wisdom than any generation in human history, we seem more anxious about our outcomes than ever before. We treat the universe as a vast, celestial vending machine. We assume that if we press the right button, the affirmation, insert the right coin, the belief, and stare intently enough at the dispensing slot, our good must inevitably tumble out. When the slot remains empty, we do not wonder if we are standing before the wrong machine. We assume we are broken, or that our coin is counterfeit. We have forgotten that life is not a storehouse of things to be acquired. It is a creative dance to be joined. The market is loud, but the truth is silent, and it is hidden far beneath the floorboards of this transactional, frantic culture. To dissect this transactional pathology, one must look at the psychological architecture of manifestation culture. The primary mechanism at play is the reflexive loop of desperation. Why does this loop form? It begins with a fundamental misinterpretation of the law of cause and effect. We confuse the declaration of desire with the command of reality. When we ask, "Why does my affirmation feel like a demand?" we must look at the ego's need for agency. The ego lives in a world of binary outcomes: success or failure, gain or loss. It cannot fathom the concept of grace of flow that exists outside of binary calculation. Thus, the ego takes the affirmation, a tool intended to pivot the consciousness toward peace, and uses it as a lever to force the external world to match its internal preferences. How does the mind achieve this inversion? It utilizes a mechanism we might call the auditor's delusion. The mind creates a split. One part of the self is the performer, desperately trying to keep the faith, while the other part is the auditor, standing in the corner with a clipboard, marking down every moment of doubt, every stray thought of fear, every instance of impatience. The auditing mind convinces the performing mind that the outcome depends on the purity of the performance. If we ask how this destroys the spirit, the answer is found in the erosion of presence. True faith is an anchor in the present. Transactional manifestation is a launchpad toward a future that we are trying to drag into the now. We are so busy trying to manifest the next thing that we are incapable of perceiving the good thing that is currently unfolding. The irony is that by treating the universe like a vending machine, we become the very thing we are trying to escape, a machine. We become robotic, repeating scripts, policing our emotions, and losing our capacity for the messy, divine, and unpredictable nature of living. We must also challenge the notion that belief is a willpower-based muscle. In this modern context, belief is often treated as a brute force exertion. I must force myself to believe, but this is a category error. True faith is not the absence of doubt. It is the presence of a deeper trust that can hold the doubt without being consumed by it. By trying to make ourselves believe, we are merely building a more elaborate cage. We are substituting the radical, uncomfortable surrender of faith with the safe, predictable comfort of a ritual that we think we can manage. We are not trusting the divine. We are trying to bribe it. Consider the life of Florence Scovel Shinn, a woman who navigated the turn of the 20th century in New York. She was not a product of the Instagram age. She was a student of the soul. In an era of heavy machinery and the rigid industrial revolution, she taught a radical, fluid gospel. She saw a world where people were treated as parts of a grand machine, and she countered it with the idea of divine design. There is a story often told, perhaps apocryphal, yet capturing the essence of her instruction about a woman who came to her in a state of total collapse. This woman had spent years affirming a specific marriage. She had written the name, the date, the circumstances in her journals. She had visualized the ring, the house, the life. But the man had left, the business had failed, and the woman was bankrupt. She sat before Florence, weeping. I did everything right. I held the image. I spoke the words. Why did the machine not give me the prize? Florence did not offer sympathy for the broken machine. She offered a mirror. She asked, were you asking for a life, or were you demanding a prisoner? Florence explained that the woman had spent her life trying to construct a pedestal for a statue that had no life of its own. She had been so attached to the form of her desire, that man, that house, that timeline, that she had become blind to the fact that her deepest need was for a love that felt safe, a life that felt purposeful, and a heart that felt seen. She had been asking for a cage and calling it a blessing. Florence guided her to stop manifesting the man and to start releasing the need. She told her, you are not asking for a person. You are asking for the quality of love that belongs to you by divine right. If you demand it in the form of a man who does not want you, you are rejecting the very gift of love you claim to seek. The woman eventually let go of the specific outcome, a process that felt like a death only to find that her life began to pivot in ways she never could have engineered. She didn't get the man. She got a freedom she didn't know existed. She found work that utilized her talents, a community that supported her growth, and eventually, a relationship that didn't require her to manifest it into existence. She had stopped trying to operate the machine and had stepped into the stream. She learned that Florence's work was never about changing the circumstance from the outside. It was about shifting the inner architecture until the soul was large enough to receive the good that was already trying to find it. The transition from vending machine to divine receiver is marked by a shift in tone. Today, observe your own prayers, your own affirmations, and your own intentions. When you catch yourself thinking, if I do this, then I will get that, pause. Recognize that if-then statement as the signature of the transactional mind. It is a limitation. It is the ego trying to create a contract with the infinite. Your practice today is to strip away the demand. Replace your rigid, goal-oriented affirmations with a wider, more receptive posture. Instead of affirming, I am going to get this job by next Tuesday, try a more profound, expansive articulation. I am open to the work that aligns with my deepest essence. I release the need to know the how, and I trust the unfolding of my divine design. This is not a surrender to passivity. It is an escalation of power. It is the power of a heart that is so secure in its worth that it does not need to force the world to prove it. Take a moment now to like this video, not as an act of agreement, but as an act of release, a symbolic gesture of stepping away from the vending machine and into the open, uncharted landscape of your true life. You are beginning to see that the manifestation you have been chasing is a pale shadow of the reality that is actually yours. The deeper work, the Florence work, is not about acquiring things. It is about becoming the kind of person who is clear enough to recognize their good, even when it appears in a form that the reasoning mind never dared to imagine. In the next chapter, we descend into the trap of perfection. We shall explore why the modern seeker is so terrified of a single, stray, anxious thought, and how this obsession with being perfectly positive is actually the surest way to build a home inside of fear. You are learning that your worth is not a fragile thing that can be damaged by a moment of human doubt. You are bigger than your thoughts, and you are far more powerful than the narrow scripts you have been writing for yourself. Picture a high-ceilinged room at the center of a labyrinthine mansion. The walls are covered in thousands of intricate, ticking clocks, each representing a thought, an affirmation, or an intention set into the atmosphere of a single human life. In the center of this room sits the auditor. They are not a stranger. They are the most intimate, punishing aspect of the self. They hold a golden quill and a ledger of infinite length. Their task is relentless, to ensure that not one second of doubt, not one tremor of fear, and not one breath of hesitation enters the machinery of the manifestation process. The air in this room is sterile, devoid of the scent of earth or the chaos of the wind. It is the atmosphere of a museum, where nothing is allowed to move unless it has been curated, sanitized, and approved. The auditor leans over the ledger, eyes darting, muscles coiled. A shadow of worry passes over the soul's face. Perhaps a bill arrived in the mail, or a loved one spoke a word of discouragement. The auditor immediately strikes the quill against the page. Deficit. Failure. Contamination. This is the hidden, suffocating reality of the perfection trap. The seeker believes that to manifest their heart's desire, they must maintain a state of unblemished, crystalline positivity. They imagine that the divine is a strict judge who weighs the heart on a scale where a single grain of fear can tip the balance toward ruin. They are not living. They are guarding a border. They have mistaken the spiritual path for a performance where the smallest mistake could cause the entire set to collapse. It is a paradox of monumental proportions. In the pursuit of perfect faith, they have manufactured a state of total, trembling insecurity. They are the prisoners of their own standards, waiting for a liberation that they have made impossible to receive by making it contingent on a flawlessness that does not exist in the human experience. To dismantle the trap of perfection, we must engage in a rigorous exploration of the architecture of spiritualized anxiety. Why does the human mind, which is inherently fluid, seek to anchor itself in a fantasy of static perfection? The answer lies in the ego's conflation of control with safety. The ego perceives the world as a chaotic, threatening expanse. It believes that if it can just manage its internal state, if it can reach a point of perfect alignment, it will be immune to the unpredictability of reality. But when we ask, how does this actually function in the psyche? We find that the ego is using the language of spiritual practice to create a rigid, armored shell. It is a form of spiritualized OCD. By policing every thought and feeling, the seeker believes they are preventing the wrong outcomes. We must ask, why do we believe that a passing thought is a creative act of destruction? The source is a misunderstanding of the nature of the unconscious. We are taught that the subconscious is a vast field that grows whatever we plant, and therefore we must never, ever plant a weed. But this is a primitive, mechanistic view of the soul. The soul is not a garden that dies because of a single thistle. It is an ecosystem with a self-correcting, divine intelligence. The recursive error here is the belief that observation equals creation. We think that if we observe our own doubt, we are creating that doubt as our future. But there is a vital distinction between noticing a shadow and becoming one with it. Perfection says, I must never doubt. Faith, true, rugged, unshakable faith says, I can notice when I have wandered into fear, and I can choose to return to the center without losing my soul. Perfection demands the absence of the human experience. Faith invites the fullness of it. When we attempt to suppress our humanity, we do not eliminate fear. We merely drive it into the basement of our consciousness, where it festers and grows teeth. By fearing the wrong thoughts, we give them a power they do not inherently possess. We feed the fear with our attention, turning a fleeting moment of insecurity into a monument of manifestation sabotage. The path of Florence Scovel Shinn was not about becoming a saint who never trembles. It was about becoming a master who knows that even when the house shakes, the foundation of divine intelligence remains unmoved. In the northern mountains, there lived a stonemason named Julian. Julian was famous for his ability to carve arches that held the weight of cathedrals for centuries. One day, a young student arrived, desperate to learn the secret of his perfect stone setting. Master, the boy asked, how do you ensure that every stone is placed without a single tremor of hesitation? How do you ensure that your mind is perfectly still so that the arch never falls? Julian took the boy to the yard where he kept his rejected stones, the ones that had cracked or warped. Look at these, Julian said. Every single one of these was placed by a man who was terrified of making a mistake. They were so focused on the perfect placement that they could not feel the vibration of the stone. They were rigid. And because they were rigid, they were brittle. Julian then took the boy to a rising arch. See this stone? He pointed to a block that was slightly asymmetrical. I carved that on a day when I was angry. I was mourning a loss. My hands were shaking. I was full of doubt. But I did not stop. I did not try to fix my internal state before I laid the stone. I simply laid it with the honesty of that moment. I trusted that the arch would accommodate the truth of my hands. The student was aghast. But isn't that a flaw? It is a human mark, Julian corrected. The arch does not care about my state of mind. It cares about the balance of the whole. When you try to be perfect, you create a structure of ego. When you allow yourself to be present doubts, fears, and all, you create a structure of grace. The stone holds because I stopped trying to control the stone and started listening to the weight of the mountain. The arch held. It stood for 300 years. It was not a perfect arch. It was a living one. It had room for the mason's sorrow, his anger, and his moments of uncertainty. It did not collapse because the mason had the courage to be imperfect. The student realized then that the perfection he sought was the very thing that would have made his work crumble. He had been looking for a way to transcend his humanity, when the only way to build anything lasting was to invite his humanity to the table. The transition into a life of grace requires the courage to surrender your clipboard. You are not the auditor. You are not the judge, nor the jury, nor the executioner of your own destiny. You are a participant in a design that is far larger than the scope of your current concerns. To embody this today, begin by observing the auditor in your own mind. When you feel the familiar tightening in your chest as a negative thought arises, do not fight it. Do not attempt to replace it with an affirmation of toxic positivity. Instead, offer it a seat. Acknowledge it. I see you, fear. I feel you, doubt. Then, with a gentle, non-reactive motion, return your focus to the deeper truth of your foundation. You are not your thoughts. You are the space in which they appear. By refusing to give the fear the power of your reaction, you rob it of its authority. This is the practice of becoming less obedient to fear. It is a practice of radical gentleness. Like this transmission, if you are ready to stop policing your spirit and start living in the grace that welcomes even your most human moments, your worthiness is not a variable, it is a constant. It is not something you must earn through the mental gymnastics of perfection. You are beginning to realize that the manifestation you are seeking isn't a prize for being a perfect student. It is the natural inheritance of a soul that has learned to stop hiding. In our next chapter, we descend further into the tyranny of the route. We shall explore why we cling to specific outcomes, the one job, the one person, the one timeline, as if they were the only possible expressions of our good. You are about to discover that your attachment to the how is the only thing standing between you and the what that is truly, deeply yours. Observe the human hand when it is seized by absolute terror. The fingers curl inward, the tendons pull taut as steel wire, and the knuckles drain of blood until they are as white as bleached bone. The hand transforms from an instrument of reception into an instrument of defense, a weaponized fist that can neither give nor receive. This biological reflex, the instinct to clutch, to hold, to crush, is the exact physiological mirror of what the human spirit does when it attempts to dictate the precise choreography of its own destiny. Imagine a traveler standing at the edge of an unimaginably vast, sunlit ocean. This traveler is parched, dying of thirst, and has spent years praying for the arrival of water. Yet, when the tide finally rolls in, roaring with the promise of absolute satiation, the traveler refuses to approach the shoreline. Instead, they stand miles inland, clutching a single, rusted, narrow pipe, demanding that the ocean must flow exclusively through this exact cylinder in order to be accepted. If the water arrives as rain, they curse the sky. If it arrives as a rushing river to their left, they close their eyes. They have become so violently attached to the rusted pipe, the chosen route of delivery, that they are willing to die of thirst while surrounded by an infinite expanse of water. This is the great paradox of the modern seeker. We raise our voices to the heavens, demanding a life of boundless abundance, unconditional love, and unshakable peace. We speak the language of the infinite, yet we provide the universe with a delivery slot so microscopic, so rigidly defined, that a single breath of wind could barely pass through it. We decree that the abundance must come from this specific promotion. The love must arrive through this specific person. The peace must be achieved by this specific Tuesday. When the outer world begins to move in a different direction, when the promotion is given to another, when the person walks away, when the timeline collapses, we do not assume that a grander architecture is at play. We assume that the universe is broken, that our affirmations were too weak, or that our spiritual practice has failed. We mistake the closing of a narrow passage for the death of our desires. The spiritual practice, once a sanctuary, devolves into a grueling siege. We are no longer co-creators with life. We are wardens, standing guard over a narrow, suffocating corridor, desperately trying to force the boundless wind into a tiny, fragile box. To dismantle this suffocating paradigm, one must bravely enter the subterranean vaults of the human psyche and interrogate the reasoning mind. The reasoning mind is a brilliant librarian, but it is a terrible visionary. It possesses no original imagination. It can only construct visions of the future by repurposing the fragmented bricks of the past. When it desires safety, it searches its archives, finds a memory of what safety used to look like, and projects that exact image onto tomorrow. Let us employ the mechanism of recursive inquiry. Why do we develop such a tyrannical attachment to the route? We must look beyond the surface desire. When a person fixates on a singular career opportunity, they are rarely obsessed with the desk, the commute, or the corporate logo. They are obsessed with the psychological sanctuary they believe that specific job will provide. They are asking for validation, autonomy, and the cessation of financial panic. But the reasoning mind, terrified of the abstract nature of these needs, conflates the essence of the desire with the vehicle of its delivery. It dictates. The only way to achieve the essence of security is through the vehicle of this exact job. How? Then, does this attachment function as a defense mechanism? It operates through the illusion of sovereignty. The ego is acutely aware of its own fragility in a chaotic, unpredictable cosmos. To surrender the how and the when to a higher intelligence feels, to the ego, like a kind of psychological death. It feels like stepping off a precipice into an abyss. By shrinking the infinite, multi-dimensional intelligence of the universe down to a manageable, human-sized timeline, the ego maintains the illusion that it is the supreme monarch of reality. It tells itself, if I can control the delivery method, I can prevent myself from ever being surprised, hurt, or disappointed again. But this is the ultimate fallacy. As Florence Scovel Shinn observed with piercing clarity, one of the quietest, most insidious forms of fear is attachment to the root. It is a fear that wears the polished mask of faith. We say we trust the divine, but we hand the divine a rigid, non-negotiable script and demand it be performed exactly as written. This is not faith. It is an ultimatum. It is the ego demanding to supervise the orchestrations of the cosmos. When we dictate the route, we severely limit the avenues through which grace can operate. We close the doors to synchronicity, to serendipity, and to the miraculous. We operate under the delusion that our reasoning mind, a faculty that cannot even accurately predict the weather 3 days in advance, is somehow qualified to engineer the infinite complexities of our highest destiny. The reasoning mind demands to see the entire staircase before it will take a single step. But divine intelligence operates differently. It often illuminates only the very next stone, asking for a trust that transcends logic. The profound tragedy of the human condition is not that we ask for too much, but that we demand it arrive in a package so small it crushes the very gift we are trying to receive. In the golden era of antiquity, in a prosperous harbor city where the scent of salt and saffron mingled in the air, there lived a formidable merchant named Silas. Silas had spent a lifetime amassing a modest fortune, but he desired to leave a legacy that would echo through the centuries. To achieve this, he liquidated every asset, sold his vast estates, and invested his entire life's work into a single, magnificent galleon named the Aurelia. The Aurelia was a masterpiece of naval engineering, loaded to the brim with the rarest spices, the finest silks, and precious gems, destined for a kingdom across the great sea. Silas had mapped the route himself, a perfectly calculated line drawn across parchment, charting the winds, the stars, and the currents. He had decreed that his legacy, his ultimate good, would be delivered via this exact ship on this exact route, before the first snow of winter. For weeks, Silas stood at the docks, watching the horizon. But the sea is an untamable beast. A tempest, unpredicted by any chart, rose from the dark depths. The storm was merciless, an apocalyptic fury of wind and crushing waves. A surviving sailor eventually washed ashore upon a piece of splintered mast, bringing the devastating news. The Aurelia had been swallowed by the abyss. Everything was gone. Silas was destroyed. He fell to his knees on the cobblestones, rending his garments, weeping until his voice was a hollow rasp. He cursed the heavens, declaring that he had been forsaken, that his destiny had been stolen, and that his life was now entirely devoid of purpose. For 3 long years, Silas became a ghost. He haunted the docks, staring blankly at the empty horizon, mourning the lost route, completely consumed by the tragedy of the sunken ship. He was a man who had built his home inside of a profound, unyielding despair. What Silas did not know what his grief and his absolute attachment to the sea route prevented him from seeing, was that before the Aurelia had even set sail, the king of a vast, overland empire had heard tales of Silas's legendary acumen. The king had dispatched a grand caravan, traveling across mountains and deserts, carrying an offer of partnership that would make Silas the royal purveyor for an entire continent. The caravan carried a fortune, 10 times the value of the Aurelia. Because Silas was violently attached to the sea, he never looked toward the mountains. He spent his days weeping at the docks, ignoring the loud, rhythmic knocking at the heavy wooden gates of his own courtyard on the other side of the city. The emissaries knocked for weeks before finally turning back, assuming the great merchant had perished. The universe had not denied Silas his fortune. The deeper good he had asked for, a lasting legacy, immense wealth, and supreme purpose, was actively trying to reach him. But the universe had changed the courier. The sea route was closed, but the land route had been opened wide. Silas's tragedy was not the loss of his ship. His tragedy was his absolute refusal to accept his salvation when it arrived by caravan instead of by sail. He had mistaken the destruction of the route for the destruction of the destination. The story of the merchant is not a relic of antiquity. It is the exact psychological drama you are enacting today. You must look at your own life and ask yourself, what is my sunken ship? What is the specific job, the specific person, or the specific timeline that you have been mourning? What is the narrow passage you have been staring at so intently that you have gone entirely blind to the vast, open roads rising up behind you? To embody this truth today, you must practice the physical and spiritual art of uncurling your fingers. Sit quietly, close your eyes, and visualize the exact outcome you have been aggressively trying to force. See the person's face. See the title on the door. See the exact number in the bank account. Feel the tension in your jaw and your hands as you grip this image. Now, with a deliberate, slow breath, open your hands and turn your palms upward. Speak this truth into the quiet architecture of your mind. I desire the essence of this good, but I completely release the root. I evict my ego from the director's chair. I allow my good to arrive by sea, by land, or by air. I am open to a wider arrangement. This is the moment of the great pivot. It is the exact second where you stop fighting the current and allow yourself to be carried by it. You are no longer demanding that the universe prove its love to you through a rusted pipe. You are walking toward the ocean. But what happens when you finally let go of the map? What occurs in the unseen realms when the reasoning mind abdicates its throne and surrenders its desperate need for control? In the next chapter, we shall cross the threshold into the most mysterious and profound territory of Florence Scovel Shinn's teachings. We will encounter the unseen architect. We will explore the majestic, quiet power of divine intelligence and discover why the path that is truly yours is often entirely invisible to the logical mind until the exact moment you are required to step upon it. You have uncurled your fingers. Now, the true work begins. There is a profound silence that descends when the frantic chatter of the personal will finally ceases. It is not the silence of an empty room, but the pregnant, humming stillness of a cathedral before a great symphony begins. Imagine, for a moment, the vast, subterranean root system of a forest. Above ground, each tree stands as an individual distinct, striving, reaching for its own patch of sunlight. Yet, beneath the soil, these giants are interwoven in a silent, sophisticated exchange of nutrients and information. A complex architecture orchestrated by a wisdom that does not depend on the perspective of the individual branch. The human condition is a similar illusion of isolation. We perceive ourselves as solitary travelers, hacking through the dense undergrowth of life, with nothing but our own intellect to guide us. We believe that if we do not constantly scan the horizon, adjust the compass, and manually prune our path, the forest will claim us. We treat our private will, our limited, linear, ego-driven decision-making, as the supreme authority of our existence. Yet, there is a paradox here that few dare to face. The very moments of our greatest life shifts rarely occur because of our frantic calculations. They arrive in the quiet, in the sudden serendipities, the coincidental meetings, and the strange, inexplicable shifts in the current of events that seem to happen to us rather than because of us. This is the presence of the unseen architect. It is the intelligence that breathes without our conscious command, that heals the cut without our supervision, and that weaves the grand tapestry of our destiny while we are busy worrying about the next stitch. To rely on private will alone is to attempt to row a boat across a raging ocean using only a sewing needle. To align with divine intelligence is to hoist the sails and recognize that the wind, which has been blowing all along, is finally ready to carry you home. To grasp the distinction between private will and divine intelligence, we must perform a rigorous psychological dissection. We must ask, why is the ego so profoundly resistant to the concept of a larger, guiding wisdom? The ego is a construct built upon the foundation of separation. It views the universe as a collection of external objects to be conquered or avoided. Its primary tool logic is a linear, sequential processor. It can calculate A to B, but it cannot comprehend the multidimensional complexity of a reality where A, B, and the entire alphabet are shifting simultaneously. When we ask how the private will limits our potential, we find that it acts as a filter, restricting our perception to only that which it can already categorize and predict. It is a closed system. It cannot bring in the new, because the new, by definition, has no precedent in its library of experience. The recursive trap of the private will is that it mistakes activity for progress. We work, we stress, we plan, and we manipulate, believing that the sheer force of our exertion is what moves the needle. But if we inquire deeper, why do we feel we must force? We hit the bedrock of fear. The belief that the universe is a place of scarcity, and that we are its only defenders. How, then, does divine intelligence operate? It functions through the principle of right action, which is fundamentally different from driven action. Right action is not the product of the reasoning mind's panic. It is the manifestation of an inner alignment. Divine intelligence operates in the realm of potentiality, where outcomes are not built but revealed. It uses the entire field of the person's life, their history, their talents, their connections, and even their mistakes as material for the architecture. The struggle between these two is the central drama of the spiritual life. The private will demands, show me the whole map, guarantee the outcome, and allow me to approve the process. Divine intelligence remains silent on the map, but it is vocal in the prompting. It speaks in the language of intuition, the inner nudge, the door that swings open exactly when the old one has been locked. The mind asks for the blueprint. The divine gives the next step. One requires the death of the ego's need for certainty. The other requires the birth of a trust that is based not on what you see, but on what you know to be true in the marrow of your soul. History is filled with narratives that illustrate this profound surrender, though they are often framed as tales of genius rather than surrender. Consider the 19th century inventor Elias, who worked for years to solve the complex mechanical problem of a sewing machine needle. He had spent decades applying his private will, logical deduction, intense labor, and precise mathematical modeling. He failed. Every iteration he built was clumsy, prone to breaking, and ultimately useless. He was driven to the brink of financial ruin, his mind a fractured landscape of frustration. One night, exhausted beyond the point of reasoning, he fell into a feverish, heavy sleep. In that dream, he saw a vision of warriors in a jungle, brandishing spears with holes in the tips. He woke with a start, the image burning in his consciousness. The reasoning mind immediately dismissed it. What did spears have to do with needles? But the deeper intelligence, the part that had been bypassed by his years of frantic labor, caught the spark. He realized in an instant that the eye of the needle did not belong at the base, as he had insisted for years based on the logical design of hand-sewing needles. It belonged at the tip. He didn't solve the problem through harder work. He solved it by finally allowing his private, rigid will to go silent providing the space for the answer to emerge from a realm the logic-obsessed mind could not touch. This was not a moment of luck. It was a moment of divine direction. He had been treating the universe like a math equation to be forced into submission. In that moment of surrender, he allowed the intelligence of the whole to provide the missing piece. This is how the unseen architect works. It does not wait for us to be smart enough or hardworking enough. It waits for us to be quiet enough to receive the wisdom that is already seeking expression through us. To move from the exhaustion of private will to the effortless momentum of divine intelligence, you must first acknowledge the limits of your own architecture. You have spent too long trying to be the engineer of your own life, and the fatigue is showing. Today, perform a small but radical experiment in sovereignty, the surrender of the next step. When you sit down to plan your day, or when you face the great problem that has been occupying your thoughts, take a deep breath and pause the logic. Ask yourself, am I trying to force this, or am I waiting for the signal? If you feel the frantic, high-frequency energy of trying to make it happen, stop. Do not take the step that is born of panic. Wait. Practice the art of waiting, not as a period of inactivity, but as a period of heightened observation. Your work today is to listen for the prompt, the small, calm, and undeniable sense of right action. It may feel like a hunch, a sudden inspiration to call someone, or a deep, intuitive sense that you should do nothing at all for the moment. Trust the silence. Like this video, to mark your commitment to listening rather than demanding, let this serve as a signal to your own subconscious that the era of force is ending, and the era of alignment has begun. You are learning to treat your life not as a machine that needs constant repairs, but as a living design that needs space to breathe. But what happens when that space is filled with the echoes of our past? What happens when our desire for the future is constantly being sabotaged by the ghost of who we were? In the next chapter, we shall descend into the essence beneath the form. We will strip away the surface-level desires that we have misidentified as our good, and we will discover how to articulate our deepest needs so clearly that the universe has no choice but to respond. The architecture is becoming clearer, and you are far more capable than you know. Subscribe to this journey, for we are about to unlock the core of your manifestation. The part that lies beneath the noise of the form, waiting for your honest heart to reveal it. In the heart of every human desire lies a hidden altar. Imagine walking into a grand, cavernous library where the shelves are packed, not with books, but with the discarded, physical representations of people's prayers. Here sits a glass paperweight that one person once believed would grant them stability. There lies a heavy iron key to a house that never became a home. Further down rests an ornate, gilded ring, abandoned by someone who mistook a promise for a soulmate. Each item is a form, a tangible, three-dimensional anchor onto which a human being once projected their deepest, most desperate hungers. The paradox of the human experience is that we spend our lives frantically polishing these physical vessels, hoping to find satisfaction within the glass, the iron, or the gold. We scream our affirmations at the objects, begging them to finally grant us the peace, the love, or the freedom we crave. Yet, the objects remain cold. They are silent, inanimate, and utterly incapable of providing the nourishment we seek. Consider the seeker who obsesses over a specific job title. They visualize the mahogany desk, the salary, the prestige. They believe the job is the good. But beneath that external form, the soul is actually crying out for the essence of the good. Perhaps it is the need for meaningful contribution, the craving for a sense of belonging, or the hunger for a safe environment where their gifts are honored. When the form fails, when the job is never offered or is taken away, the seeker collapses. They believe they have lost their good. They haven't. They have only lost a container. The essence remains, unblemished and eternal, still waiting to be recognized in a new, perhaps more magnificent, vessel. The tragedy is that we become so enamored with the wrapping paper of our lives that we never dare to open the gift that actually matters. To transcend the seduction of the form, we must master the art of essential distillation. We must ask, why do we so consistently misidentify the container for the contents? The answer is rooted in the limited perception of the five senses. The human brain is a processor of the physical, designed to navigate the concrete. It struggles with the abstract. To desire freedom is a terrifying, expansive prospect for the ego, because freedom has no edges. It cannot be bought, sold, or displayed on a vision board. But a salary of $200,000, that is concrete, that is measurable, that is safe. Why does the ego gravitate toward the measurable? It is an attempt to create a contract with the universe. By choosing a specific form, the ego feels it can hold the divine accountable. I have done X, so you must provide Y. When we ask how this limits our evolution, the answer is found in the mechanism of perceptual narrowing. The moment you decide that your happiness can only arrive in the form of a specific partner, a specific house, or a specific achievement, you effectively blind yourself to all other possibilities. You activate a psychological filter that discards any opportunity that does not match your pre-approved blueprint. The recursive trap is this. We feel desperate for the essence, so we clutch the form. The more we clutch the form, the more we fear its loss. The more we fear its loss, the more we inflate its importance. We eventually reach a state where we believe the form is the essence. We mistake the menu for the meal. How, then, do we break this cycle? We must engage in a process of inverse mapping. Instead of starting with the form and wondering what it will give us, we start with the state we seek. We must ask, what quality of life does this desire promise to fulfill? If the answer is security, we then ask, can I define security as a frequency of being, rather than a balance in a bank account? When we shift our focus from the vessel to the essence, we allow the divine to become creative. We stop demanding the water come through a pipe. We allow it to arrive as rain, as a river, or as a spring. We move from being contractors of our own destiny to being vessels of grace. In a kingdom of iron and steam, there lived a renowned alchemist named Kalin. He spent his days in a soot-stained laboratory, obsessing over the transmutation of lead into gold. He believed that if he could just craft the perfect golden coin, he would possess the key to total happiness, safety, and respect. He labored for decades, his health fading, his home falling into disrepair, his family forgotten. He was so consumed by the form of the gold that he had ceased to be a man. One afternoon, a traveler arrived at his workshop, clutching a simple, unadorned silver mirror. I have traveled across the world, the traveler said, to see the man who knows the secret of gold. But I see only a man who has forgotten his own reflection. The traveler placed the mirror on Kalin's workbench. Look not at the metal, but at the light, he instructed. Kalin looked into the mirror, expecting to see the reflection of his own toil-worn face. Instead, the mirror acted as a lens of essence. It showed him not his aging skin, but the joy he once felt as a young boy, drawing in the dirt. It showed him the love he had for the stars he used to study. It showed him the courage he possessed when he first began his journey. Kalin realized that he had been seeking gold because he believed gold would give him back the sense of power and vitality he had lost. The gold was never the goal. The gold was a poor, cold substitute for the vibrant, living essence of his own spirit. He had been trying to buy his own soul back from the universe, one coin at a time, using a currency that had no value in the realms of the eternal. He didn't stop his work, but he stopped his obsession. He realized he was not an alchemist of metal. He was an alchemist of consciousness. He began to work with a new spirit, not to create a golden coin, but to express the light of his own curiosity. Within a year, his discoveries changed the kingdom. His prosperity arrived in ways he never planned, and he found that he had more gold than he could ever spend, not because he had demanded it, but because he had finally become the person who was capable of sustaining it. He had recognized that the essence, the feeling of vitality and purpose, was the attractor, and the form, the gold, was merely the shadow that followed the light. The mastery of essence is the ultimate act of spiritual maturity. It is the moment you stop treating your life like a shopping list and start treating it like a symphony. Today, perform an act of essential disclosure. Take your notebook and look at the situation that has been causing you the most tension. Ask yourself, if I could strip away the form, the person, the job, the specific outcome, what is the hunger underneath? What am I truly starving for? Write it down. Is it recognition? Is it safety? Is it a sense of adventure? Is it the feeling of being deeply, authentically loved? Once you have named the essence, breathe. Recognize that this essence is not trapped inside the form you have been obsessing over. It is a fundamental truth of the universe that is already flowing toward you. By naming it, you release the bottleneck. You tell the universe, I want the juice, not just the skin of the fruit. Let this act be a declaration that you are no longer willing to settle for the shadow of your good, but are ready to claim the light. You have begun to see that your manifestation was never about the things you acquire, but about the person you are becoming. Yet, even when we align our essence, the world can still feel heavy. We can still find ourselves caught in the grip of the past. In the next chapter, we will address the dignity of practical action. We will resolve the age-old tension between faith and work, and discover how to walk through the world with a step that is both calm and unstoppable. The staircase is appearing, but it is not built of stone. It is built of your own intentional presence. Imagine the seeker who has internalized the doctrine of divine surrender so completely that they have mistaken stillness for dormancy. They sit in a room perfumed with incense, their eyes closed, their posture perfect, waiting for the universe to rearrange the furniture of their lives. They have heard the teaching that they must release control, and so they have effectively released their hands from the steering wheel of their own existence. They watch the shadows lengthen across the wall, believing that if they only stay quiet enough, if they only hold the perfect meditative state, the doors of their life will swing open of their own accord. There is a profound, aching irony in this posture. It is a cinematic scene of utter tragic irony. The seeker is starving for movement, yet refuses to stand up to reach for the bread placed just inches away. They confuse the spiritual state of trusting the unseen with the physical state of ignoring the seen. They have fallen for the great modern delusion that to act in the physical world is to display a lack of faith. But consider the mountain. A mountain is a symbol of absolute, unwavering presence. Yet, a mountain is never still in the way we imagine stillness. It is constantly weathering, shifting, settling, and being forged by the relentless pressure of tectonic plates. It does not sit in a vacuum. It engages with the wind, the rain, and the sun. True spiritual power, the kind Florence Scovel Shinn described, is not the absence of action. It is the dignity of it. It is the capacity to move through the world with the force of a landslide and the grace of a river, all while remaining tethered to an internal architecture of peace. To believe that your progress depends solely on the vibrational work is to deny the reality of the vessel you inhabit. You are a spirit with hands, a soul with feet. To ignore the practical step is to leave your divinity ungrounded, floating in a cloud of intention that never touches the earth. To resolve the tension between faith and works, we must engage in a recursive audit of our own motivations. Why do we harbor the suspicion that practical effort is a betrayal of spiritual trust? The answer lies in a psychological misidentification of effort as force. The ego believes that if an action is hard, if it requires sweat, if it involves rejection, or if it involves a no from the world, it must be the result of a blocked frequency. We ask, why does the modern seeker fear the practical step? It is because the practical step is where we are most vulnerable. To apply for a job, to launch a business, or to initiate a conversation is to expose our intent to the scrutiny of the world. It is much safer to stay in the realm of the mental manifester, where we can control the narrative in the sanctuary of our own heads. How does this fear manifest as a spiritual philosophy? It manifests as the passive trap. We tell ourselves we are waiting for a sign, when we are actually waiting for a guarantee. We believe that if we take a step and it doesn't immediately lead to the desired result, then we have failed the spiritual test. But let us push deeper. If we ask why the divine would grant us an intellect, a voice, and a body, the answer is clearly for the purpose of engagement. The recursive logic is this: if the goal of life is the expansion of the soul, and if the physical world is the canvas upon which that expansion is recorded, then action is not the enemy of faith. Action is the language of faith. The philosophical error here is the belief that action must be fueled by anxiety. This is the core of the trauma. We have spent our lives acting out of fear, out of a need to prove ourselves, or out of a terror of scarcity. We assume that all action is tainted by this old, frantic energy. But there is a third way: inspired action. This is action taken from a place of radical, inner alignment. It is the action of a surgeon who moves with total precision, not because they are afraid of the patient dying, but because they are perfectly present with the work. It is the action of a painter who does not force the image, but follows the brush. When you act from this place, the action becomes a form of prayer. You are not doing to get, you are doing to express. Consider the historical figure of a master gardener who tended the royal orchards of a dry, unforgiving climate. The legends of his harvest were immense. While his neighbors suffered from shriveled fruit and barren boughs, his trees were lush, laden with heavy, sweet produce. A curious traveler, observing the gardener, asked, "Master, do you perform a secret ritual? Do you pray over the seeds at midnight? What is the unseen force that makes your garden thrive, where all others perish?" The gardener did not speak of secret spells or celestial alignments. He pointed to his tools, his iron shovel, his heavy buckets, the worn leather of his gloves. "I pray, yes," the gardener said, "but my prayer is in the digging." He explained that for every hour he spent in quiet meditation, he spent 3 hours hauling water from the distant river. He did not ask the rain to ignore the laws of the climate. He built irrigation channels to guide the water where it was needed. He did not command the soil to be fertile. He tilled it, fertilized it, and removed the weeds that would steal the nutrients from his fruit. "The trees have a destiny to produce fruit," he said, "but that destiny requires a partner. If I do not dig the trench, the water cannot reach the root. If I do not prune the dead wood, the light cannot reach the bud. My faith is the reason I dig, and my work is the way I show the universe I am ready to receive the harvest." The gardener was not forcing the trees to grow. He was creating the conditions for growth. He understood that the divine design was already present in the seed, but the physical manifestation of that design required the dignity of his presence, his labor, and his intelligence. He did not view the hauling of water as a chore that blocked his manifestation. He viewed it as the physical manifestation of his commitment to the life he was cultivating. He did not fear the drought. He prepared for it. He did not wait for a sign to begin. He began because the season had arrived, and his hands were the instruments of the harvest. The dignity of practical action is the bridge between your inner world and your outer reality. Today, you must confront the passive trap within your own life. Identify one thing you have been waiting for: a conversation, a project, an application, a decision that you have been withholding because you are afraid it will look like you are still trying to control the outcome. Take that one step, not with the frantic, clawing energy of the ego, but with the quiet, steady rhythm of the gardener. Do not decide that your entire future hinges on the result of this action. Do not make the action your source. Simply do the work. Send the email, make the call, draft the document, plant the seed. When you take the step, speak these words to the silence of your own heart. I do not act to force, I act to participate. I am the vessel through which this work moves into the world. This is not a retreat into the frantic world of busyness. It is an ascent into the realm of purposeful engagement. You are discovering that the most spiritual person in the room is not the one who avoids the world, but the one who walks through it with the clearest intent and the most diligent hands. Yet, even with the most inspired action, there remains one final, critical hurdle, the discipline of the wait. We have taken the step, we have tilled the soil, but we still face the silence that follows. In the next chapter, we descend into the practice of separation. We will learn how to write the life we want without shackling ourselves to the outcome, and how to hold the vision while remaining completely detached from the deadline. The staircase is being built, one step of honest, practical labor at a time. The room is heavy with the scent of old paper and the sharp, metallic tang of an ink-filled pen. Before the practitioner lies a sheet of stark, unyielding white, a blank page. To the untrained eye, this is merely stationery. To the soul engaged in the work of spiritual architecture, this page is a vacuum, a terrifyingly vast expanse of potential that demands the truth. Here, the paradox of the spiritual life is laid bare. We have been told that our words have power, that they are the architects of our reality. Yet, we have spent our lives filling these pages with the scribbled franticness of our own desperation. We have used our pens as shovels to dig deeper holes of control, writing out our demands and our definitions, begging the universe to confirm our narrow view of what good must look like. There is a profound, cinematic silence in this moment of preparation. A flicker of light catches the edge of the notebook, illuminating the tiny, invisible particles of dust dancing in the air, the debris of 1,000 forgotten plans and abandoned routes. The seeker holds the pen, and for a heartbeat, they do not write. They recognize the weight of the moment. They have finally admitted that their previous maps have led only to this sterile room of their own making. They are about to engage in a ritual of radical honesty. They are not here to write a spell, nor to perform a conjuring trick to force the hand of the infinite. They are here to perform an act of separation, to surgically detach the essence of their deepest longing from the jagged, broken shards of the routes they have tried to force. The blank page is no longer a cage, it is a confession, and for the first time, the seeker is prepared to write not what they think they need, but what they are actually, fundamentally asking for. To master the practice of separation, we must perform a forensic examination of our own desires. We must employ the method of recursive thinking to peel back the layers of the false form. Why do we collapse our entire reality into the tiny box of a singular, expected outcome? We must look to the cognitive bias of pattern recognition. The reasoning mind is programmed to seek safety in the familiar. When it senses a need for love, for recognition, for survival, it immediately searches its history for a known container that has held that need before. How does this psychological shorthand become a prison? It becomes a prison because the mind lacks the imagination to conceive of a container it has not yet touched. When we ask why the practice of separation is so uncomfortable, the answer is simple. It forces us to confront the void. By separating the essence from the route, we are effectively telling the reasoning mind, your map is insufficient. The ego interprets this as an existential threat. It screams, if I don't demand this specific job, I won't get any job. The recursive trap is this. We believe that by loosening our grip on the route, we are losing our security. But the truth, viewed through the lens of divine intelligence, is that we are actually expanding our security. We are moving from a state of conditional existence, I am safe if this one thing happens, to a state of absolute reliance on our own capacity to receive. How do we sustain this separation? We must understand the nature of the essence as a frequency. If you are seeking stability, you are not seeking a specific contract. You are seeking the frequency of groundedness, of sufficiency, of presence. When you separate the essence from the form, you allow the universe to act as a matchmaker. It can bring you stability through a new career, through a shift in your investments, or through a sudden, profound realization that you already possess more than enough. By separating, you are not giving up on your desires, you are finally setting them free to exist in their most potent, abundant form. You are moving from the role of an architect who draws a cage, to a gardener who sows the seed and trusts the soil to provide the shape. In a city of soaring stone and glass, there lived an architect named Julian, whose buildings were marvels of efficiency but prisons of form. He was obsessed with the perfection of the structure, the symmetry of the arches, the exact height of the ceilings, the specific shade of the masonry. He believed that if he could design the perfect structure, he would achieve the acclaim he had craved since his youth. He drew sketches of singular, rigid designs, and he spent his life trying to force reality to match the lines on his parchment. When a client asked for something different, Julian grew bitter. When the land proved unsuitable for his specific design, he fought the terrain, forcing the ground to fit his sketch. His rival, a woman named Clara, worked differently. Clara was known for buildings that seemed to breathe, structures that looked as if they had grown from the earth itself. One day, a young student asked Clara how she managed to design such buildings without ever drafting a rigid, final plan. Clara pulled out her sketchbook. It was filled not with walls and measurements, but with words: light, flow, connection, shelter, grace. "I do not draw walls," Clara explained. "I draw the essence. If I am building a house for a family, I do not design the rooms until I understand the life that will happen within them. I separate the function from the form. I seek the essence of connection and shelter first. The form, the walls, the roof, the windows, that is the last thing I consider, and even then, I allow the environment to guide the line." Julian, the rival, spent his life fighting the world to build his sketches. He died a master of his own small, rigid plans, largely forgotten because his buildings were designed for his own ego, not for the people who lived in them. Clara, however, understood the practice of separation. She didn't own the designs, she channeled the essence. She didn't fight the earth, she listened to it. She lived in a world of infinite possibility because she never confused the sketch for the structure. She knew that the essence was the architecture of the infinite, and the form was merely the shadow that followed the light. The practice of separation is not a mere intellectual exercise. It is the fundamental shift that determines whether you will continue to struggle against the tide or begin to sail with it. Today, you will engage in the first stage of this ritual. Do not rush. Take your notebook and, at the top of a fresh, clean page, write the words, "The route I have been trying to force." Pause. Look at that ink. Do not judge the desire, but do not look away from the grip. Write the name of the project, the person, the goal, the outcome. Now, draw a line beneath it. Below that, write, "The essence beneath the form." Take as long as you need to answer this. When you feel the tension leave your shoulders, when you can identify the feeling, the safety, the connection, the expansion that you believe this specific route will provide, you have succeeded in the first stage of the separation. This is the moment you stop drawing the lines of your cage and start opening the gates of your potential. You are now prepared to move into the final, sacred phase of this work. We have dismantled the transactional mind, we have confronted the trap of perfection, and we have learned to distinguish between our private will and the wider design. In the next chapter, we descend into the four-part resonance. This is the core practice, the written, spoken, and embodied ritual that Florence Scovel Shinn taught to those who were ready to stop hoping and start receiving. You have the essence now. The form is about to change. The air in the room is thin. pressurized by the weight of intention. There is a singular, golden shaft of light, piercing the gloom, illuminating the notebook that sits like an altar at the center of the desk. The pen, resting beside it, seems to hum with the kinetic potential of a lightning rod. This is the moment of the great calibration. Outside, the world continues its frantic, chaotic carousel of demands and deadlines, but inside this space, the clock has been set to a different rhythm, the rhythm of the eternal. The paradox is this: the seeker has spent a lifetime screaming their desires into the void, convinced that volume equals visibility, that intensity of panic equals speed of delivery. Now, they are about to practice the opposite. They are about to enter the four-part resonance, a ritual not of acquisition, but of alignment. The silence here is not empty. It is the sound of the self shedding its armor. Every muscle in the body, which has been braced against the future, begins to unspool. The heartbeat, once quickened by the drum of anxiety, slows to the steady, resonant pulse of a deep-sea tide. The seeker realizes, with a sudden, sharp clarity, that they are not here to convince the universe of their needs. They are here to convince themselves that they are already, fundamentally, a part of the design they seek to manifest. To execute the four-part resonance, one must understand the psychological mechanics of internal reordering. Why is it that the simple act of writing, when done with the spirit of detachment, creates a seismic shift in the consciousness? It is because the act of writing engages the motor cortex, the linguistic centers, and the reflective lobes of the brain simultaneously. It moves the intent from the chaotic, ephemeral mist of thought into the grounded, manifest realm of symbol. Why do we fail in our ordinary affirmations? Because we use them to bridge the gap between I am lacking and I want to have. We use them from a position of deficit. How does the four-part resonance bypass this? It works through the mechanism of recursive truth. 1. The forced route. The honest confession. We start here not to complain, but to witness the ego's current attachment. We ask, what am I clutching? By naming it, we neutralize its magnetic pull. 2. The deeper good. The essence. We pivot. We ask, what am I truly hungry for? This activates the prefrontal cortex to prioritize the value over the object. 3. The practical step, the stewardship. We reconnect with the physical world. This bridges the spiritual to the mundane, preventing the drift of spiritual escapism. 2-4. The divine return, the surrender. We release the how. This is the psychological equivalent of an anchor release. It ends the loop of hypervigilance. The recursive truth is this: the universe does not respond to your words, it responds to your state of being. When you perform these 4 steps, you are not sending a letter to a distant God. You are restructuring your internal neuroarchitecture. You are telling your subconscious, we are no longer operating from the frequency of lack and chase. We are operating from the frequency of receive and align. The reason this works, the reason it is powerful, is that it aligns the conscious intention with the unconscious expectation. You are moving from a house divided, where the mind is warring with the spirit, into a unified field of presence. You are no longer praying for a result. You are inhabiting the truth that the result is already a latent possibility in the field of your life. In a mountain village renowned for its intricate tapestries, there was a weaver named Alara who was failing in her trade. Her tapestries were lopsided, her colors dull, and her threads constantly snapped. She was obsessed with the result. She wanted to weave a masterpiece that would be purchased by the royal court. She spent her days pulling at the threads, tying knots in desperation, and shouting at the loom when the pattern veered off course. She was a woman possessed by the form of the masterpiece. One day, a master elder came to her loom. He did not look at the tapestry. He looked at Alara's hands. "You are pulling the thread too hard," he said. "You are trying to force the pattern to appear before the weaving has occurred." He taught her the four-part pattern. First, she had to name her frustration to admit she was trying to force a royal tapestry from a thread of doubt. Second, she had to remember the essence. She was not weaving for the court. She was weaving to express the beauty of the mountain morning. Third, she had to take the practical step. She had to learn to card the wool correctly, to dye it with patience, and to sit with a straight back. Fourth, she had to return the outcome to the weaver's law. She would weave the pattern she held, but she would let the loom decide the strength of the thread. Ilara stopped fighting the loom. She started weaving for the joy of the motion. She stopped staring at the edge of the tapestry to see if the gold had arrived. She focused on the integrity of the individual knot. One morning, she finished her work. It was not the pattern she had initially obsessed over. It was something far more intricate, more vibrant, more alive. It did not just win the favor of the court, it became an heirloom that defined the craft for a generation. She had not created the masterpiece. The masterpiece had been allowed to emerge through her because she had finally stopped being an obstacle to the pattern. The four-part resonance is the heartbeat of your new existence. It is not a ritual to be performed once and forgotten. It is a discipline to be lived. Today, you are the weaver. Take your notebook and, in the stillness of the afternoon, commit these 4 movements to the page. First, write with brutal honesty about the route you have been force-feeding the universe. Second, look deeper and distill the essence. The stability, the love, the growth. Third, identify the single, quiet, physical action that is yours to take. Today the call, the email, the boundary, the rest. Finally, speak the words of the return. I release the narrow route. I welcome the right path. I take the step that is mine. I leave the wider arrangement to the infinite. Do not rush to see the result. The power of the resonance is in the silence that follows. Treat that silence as a sacred space. Like this video, as you seal this practice into your consciousness, you are not waiting for a sign. You are living in the state of already having been heard. You have now built the internal architecture required to hold the good you have been seeking. You have mastered the deconstruction of your own illusions and the disciplined engagement of your own hands. Yet, we are not finished. There is one final, ethereal threshold to cross. In our final chapter, we shall discuss the concept of living under grace. We will explore how to maintain this internal order when the world is noisy, how to recognize the right arrival when it appears, and how to carry this wide, calm, and terrifyingly free trust into the rest of your life. The practice is done, but the unfolding is just beginning. Subscribe, for we are stepping into the final, illuminated chapter of your journey. The dawn light of a new day does not arrive with a fanfare of trumpets. It arrives as a soft, insistent gray that gradually warms into gold. Imagine standing on a threshold, the door to a house you have built with your own consciousness. For years, you lived in this house as a frantic servant, constantly polishing the floors, rearranging the furniture, and checking the locks, terrified that the roof would collapse if you stopped monitoring the structural integrity of your life for even a single hour. But this morning, you walk through the threshold and realize the house has become a temple. The frantic energy has dissolved. The fear of collapse has been replaced by the quiet, unshakable recognition that the walls were never held up by your anxiety. They were held by the unseen grace of the infinite. There is a profound, sensory-rich paradox in this state of being. You look out at the world, a world that is still loud, still demanding, still chaotic, but you feel no urge to defend yourself against it. You feel no compulsion to manipulate its variables. You have finally laid down the burden of the manager of the universe. The air feels cleaner, easier to breathe. The weight of the narrow roots has vanished, replaced by the weightless, expansive sensation of being a conduit rather than a dam. You are no longer living in the anticipation of a future event. You are living in the fullness of an unfolding revelation. You have reached the final destination of this journey, only to discover that the destination was not a place, but a posture. You are living under grace, and for the first time, you have the presence of mind to notice that the landscape was beautiful all along. To live under grace is not to exit the human experience. It is to master the art of moving within it while remaining rooted in a higher dimension. We must ask, why is the state of grace so difficult for the ego to sustain? The answer lies in the ego's addictive relationship to friction. The ego defines its existence by the resistance it meets. If there is no struggle, if there is no hard work, if there is no overcoming, the ego feels as though it is disappearing. Why do we feel a phantom need to sabotage our own peace? Because peace feels like a threat to the ego's identity. The recursive truth is this: we are afraid that if we stop managing, we will stop existing. How does one overcome this? We must perform the final, ultimate surrender, the surrender of the need to be the author. The principle of divine design suggests that your life is not a book you are writing page by agonizing page. It is a masterpiece that is already being painted through you. The how of this integration is through the discipline of observation without attachment. When you act with the full force of your intelligence and your presence, but you hold the outcome with an open palm. If the door opens, you walk through with gratitude. If the door closes, you do not curse the architecture. You recognize that the building has another, perhaps more magnificent, way forward. Why is this the highest form of power? Because it renders you invincible to the chaos of the world. If your internal stability is contingent upon external circumstances, you are a slave to the lottery of fate. But if your stability is anchored in the realization that your good is a divine right and that the universe is not working against you but as you, then you are unshakable. You become a witness to your own life. You observe the shifts, the pauses, the turns, and the breakthroughs, not with the desperation of a gambler, but with the quiet, majestic curiosity of a sovereign being. This is the ultimate manifestation, the manifestation of a soul that has finally caught up to the truth of its own divinity. In the ancient riverlands, there was a king who was obsessed with the flow of the great river. He believed that if he could control the velocity of the water, he could ensure his kingdom would never know drought or flood. He built vast stone barriers, complex canal systems, and massive floodgates. He spent his days patrolling the banks, checking the pressure of the water, and fighting the silt that threatened to clog his machinery. The kingdom grew weary and impoverished under his constant, anxious rule. For he was so busy fighting the river that he neglected the soil, the people, and the harvest. A sage arrived in the kingdom and watched the king's frantic labor. He said, "You are a master of the gate, but you are a stranger to the river." The sage convinced the king to stand aside for one day, just one day, and allow the river to flow according to its own nature. The king was terrified. He paced the banks, certain that the river would destroy the kingdom. But as the barriers were opened, the water did not rage. It flowed with a rhythmic, pulsing intelligence. It irrigated the fields in a way the stone canals never had. It washed the silt away naturally. It moved with a grace that the human mind could never have engineered. The king stood in the mud and felt the cool, clean water at his feet. He realized that the river had been trying to feed his kingdom all along, and his management had been nothing more than a series of blockages. He stopped being the king of the barriers and became the steward of the flow. He learned to read the current, to plant his crops where the river wanted to water them, and to celebrate the arrival of the flood as a gift of nutrients rather than a threat to his authority. The kingdom flourished. The king lived out his days, not in the exhaustion of struggle, but in the peace of the river. He lived under the grace of a force that was infinitely more powerful and infinitely more generous than his own private will. To live under grace is to stop being the river king of your own life. Today, you are asked to walk into your world with this one, simple, majestic premise. My good is not something I must squeeze out of the world. It is something that is already seeking me. Carry this into your interactions, your work, and your moments of solitude. When you feel the familiar urge to make something happen, pull back, take a breath. Remind yourself that you are the steward of the flow, not the master of the gate. Act with integrity, speak with honesty, and move with purpose, but leave the arrangement to the unseen architect. Your task is not to control the outcome. Your task is to remain in the frequency of the essence, to keep your hands open, and to be ready to recognize your good, even when it appears in a form that the reasoning mind never dared to suggest. You have now completed the architecture. You have dismantled the transactional mind. You have mastered the art of separation, and you have stepped out of the shadow of your own control. The notebook is filled, but the story is only just beginning. You are no longer a student of the trend. You are a practitioner of the ancient, quiet, and unstoppable power of divine design. As you close this manuscript, you may feel a sense of completion, yet there is a subtle vibration, a quiet frequency humming beneath the surface of your days, a sign that the work has taken root. You are ready to walk into the world as an observer of miracles. The path ahead is clear, and it belongs to you. But for now, place the pen down. Go out into the sunlight. The river is flowing, and your life is ready to carry you exactly where you were always meant to go. The architecture is complete. Now, begin to live.